And Donna, can we go ahead and let the Board of Medicine in?
Will do, Mr. Chairman.
All right, committee, welcome back to committee meetings in a day. It's starting to bring back good memories of a hardworking committee. So appreciate all your hard work. Committee, number one in your hearts and number one hardworking committee in the legislature. Kay, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Representative Crago.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Excused.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Williams.
Here.
Vice Chairman Washut.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Representative Swanitzer.
Excused.
Chairman Olson.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 in attendance and 2 excused. 7 in attendance, 2 excused.
Thank you, Kay. Okay, who do we have from the Board of Medicine? Go ahead and turn on your camera and your mic. Do we know, Donna, who is with us from the Board of Medicine?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, I admitted Matt Martineau with the Wyoming State Board of Medicine. He should be able to turn on his video and his mic. Mr. Martineau, if you're having difficulty, please email me.
All right, we'll give Mr. Martineau a second here to see if he lights up on our screen. We can't, until you turn on your camera, we can't see you on our screen. All right. Well, Donna, you can, if you would, maybe. Oh, hi, Mr. Martineau. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the committee, and then if you have any testimony, please provide it. If you're on standby, just let us know. You're muted, Mr. Martineau. All right.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Chairman Olson, my name's Matt Martineau. I'm actually with the Wyoming State Board of Pharmacy. Moore was just here to hopefully answer any questions that the committee might have for the Board of Pharmacy.
Board of Pharmacy, my apologies. Committee, questions for the Board of Pharmacy, Vice Chairman Washut.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Sir, could you explain to us what it takes for a product to be classified as a medicine by the federal government and how that compares to the status of marijuana today?
Mr. Martineau.
Mr. Chairman, a substance would have to go through something called a new drug application, where the FDA would evaluate the substance for both safety and efficacy to make sure that the substance can do what it is supposed to do and treat what it's supposed to treat. And so it would have to go through multiple phases of clinical trials to show that the substance is both safe and effective. When it's going through those clinical trials is where it would usually be identified if there were any concerns about it being a substance forming, a habit forming substance, in which case then it would be considered possible scheduling would be considered at that time, and the DEA would probably also be involved, as it would have to be put onto the controlled substance list and be scheduled appropriately. Typically that process can take many, many years, a decade or more in some instances, before a product gets to the point where it gets through all of those approvals. Marijuana would likely have to follow a slightly different path because it would be, right now federally, it's listed as a Schedule I substance. So it becomes an interesting thought process, I guess, or state process to schedule it differently than what the federal government has done with it. Does that answer your question, sir?
Vice Chairman Washer.
Pretty much, sir. So while marijuana, cannabis products today are commonly used as if they were medicine, it would be accurate to say that they are not a medicine. Is that a fair statement?
Currently, because it's classified federally as a Schedule I controlled substance, effectively that means it is considered to be a substance that is highly habit forming that does not have any known or acknowledged medical value at the federal level.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. No further questions for the Department of Pharmacy. All right. Thank you, Mr. Martineau.
Thank you, sir.
If you're planning on testifying on either one or both of these bills, could you just raise your hand so I can get an idea? Okay, I think I have a pretty good idea. And I have my sheet that tells me a little bit about the virtual world has doubled. So what I'm going to do, folks, and just get this out there, now that we've passed through all of our agency testimony, we're now entering what we'll call general public comment. So I'm going to ask that because of the extensive list that I have, that those individuals testifying limit your time to 2 to 3 minutes. So really shoot for 2, because at 3, I'm just going to do a hard cutoff.
Mr.
So
Chairman,
that's anyone in the virtual world and anyone in person. Yes.
I believe we now have someone from the Wyoming Board of Medicine, Kevin Bonenblust. Would you like me to admit him?
Oh, please admit Kevin. Yes, thank you. And then Donna, while you're doing that, the way I'd like to do this is I'm going to actually go between the virtual world and the physical room taking testimony. But after the Board of Medicine is complete, why don't you just drop 2 people into the room and we'll go back and forth and you just keep dropping them in and we'll just take them as they are. Does that sound good, Donna?
Sounds like a good plan. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Board of Medicine, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kevin Bonenblust. I'm the Executive Director of the Board of Medicine. I don't have any prepared comments or anything, but just wanted to make myself available if there are questions from members of the committee for, primarily I'm here for House Bill 82, but also regarding the legalization bill. So if there's questions I can answer, I'd be happy to do so. And otherwise, I have nothing more to add.
Thank you. Committee, do we have questions for the Board of Medicine? No questions. Well, thank you for joining us. It doesn't mean a question won't arise. Sometimes that happens in testimony. So if you stick around and we have a question, we'll certainly get to you. And if you hop off, we'll track you down at some point.
All right. Well, I'll stick around. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to start with the room now. Ms. Steinquist, you're up. Representative, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, for you, Mr. Chairman.
Frank, you got to light up your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Zoom will zoom in on you once you do, and then make sure you introduce yourself for the record.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are we on? Okay. My name is Frank Latta. I come down to speak to you as a citizen of Wyoming, also as somebody who's very passionate about this particular subject. I'd like to start. I have worked on this subject for a long time. I've worked with Representative, the chairman, Mr. Representative Olson, for 4 or 5 years. And we weren't always on the same page. But I got to tell you, the rest of the representatives here in town, here in the room and in the building can take a lesson. Representative Olson kept an open mind. He was opposed to it. He didn't want to have anything to do with this, but he kept an open mind. And he looked at the record, he listened to the people, and we are here today because of that. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I spent 8 years as a mayor of the city of Gillette. I spent 4 years as a state representative for the city of Gillette. In 1978, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. At the time, the doctor told me, you have 10 years, get your things in order. Well, that gladly didn't come true, but it didn't come true because I listened to my doctors. The doctors were telling me, we've got some medicines that we can try, all of which, every medicine that I've been on has been experimental. Did not know what the outcome was, did not know what the side effects were. That's the world we live in when we have diseases such as this. We do not know. Now, my disease has progressed, and that's what it does. MS progresses. And it progressed to the point that some mental clouding goes on in my mind, some ability to use my limbs becomes hard to walk up the stairs, hard to go to the bathroom, hard to eat food, difficult, has been getting worse. And why I'm telling you this, when I ran for office, every time I ran for office in Campbell County, I've won by at least 60% of the vote. I would still be in my House seat if I thought I could do a good job. I cannot because of my MS. I cannot. As you folks know, it's not an 8-to-5 job. It's a full-time job. You meet with your constituents, the things you have to do, and that wears me out. And my doctor said, you're cutting your life short. Go ahead, keep it up. You're cutting your life short. So I made the decision not to, but I cannot drop this issue. And again, I'll go back to my doctors. I went to two doctors in Billings for MS. I've been to a doctor in Rapid City, South Dakota with my MS. I've been to the MS clinic in Denver and several doctors here in Wyoming. And of those doctors, they have to treat my spasticity problem in my legs. When I lay down at night, my legs jump so much that I can't sleep, nor can my wife. It's hard to even drive when I get tired with the spasticity problem. So they put me on a drug. We'll cure that. Put me on a drug called clonazepam. You might want to look that up. That's an opioid. And so all of the doctors have kind of said, yeah, that's the drug you need to be on. So as I went into these doctors, every doctor has told me, you would be much better served using marijuana to take care of your spasticity problem than an opioid. You're going to become addicted to the opioid because as you take opioids, I don't know how many of you know, but they lose their effect. So you got to keep taking more and more. And as you take more and more, you become more and more addicted. And when you buy a drug, they give you the paperwork that tells you all the side effects. No one ever reads those. Well, if you get down to the bottom of clonazepam, it says heroin-like addiction problems. And I can damn sure tell you, when I decided I was going to quit taking it, the withdrawal symptoms that I went through for 2 to 3 weeks of not sleeping and not eating because I was addicted to heroin. And I was addicted to heroin because I could not buy a simple plant that would do the same thing, because not the doctors that I paid thousands and thousands of dollars to give me the best advice. It wasn't their issue. Their issue was you need to be on medical marijuana. You just do. I said, I cannot. The state has said I cannot. And so the money I've spent, either I tell them doctors, I guess you doctors don't know what you're talking about, because my state says I can't be on that. Now, it's cost me my career. It's cost me some businesses, because I cannot deal with my drug problem, my MS problems, without using an opioid. It's cost me my career. I would be sitting up there with you folks, and I would like to do that, but I cannot. I had to make the decision. Okay, my children and my life are a little more important than me sitting up here, because it would zap me and I could not do that. So I implore you. I am on HB 209. I am on, and I am for that. I want to see this at least go to the House floor. We can kick it around. It'll come up. The floor is going to either come up yay or nay. There's going to be amendments. There's going to be a lot of different things, but the main thing is we need to get this to the floor for discussion. And for the rest of the people in the room that would use this for medical reasons, their story is going to be somewhat similar. We heard that with Representative Baker. His story is the same way. A lot of us have given our lives, and half of our lives, trying to fight a condition that we had nothing to do with getting. And now all of a sudden we have to do that. So I'm not gonna bore you with too much more.
Yeah, Frank, that's you got 1 minute warning.
Yeah,
Since I gave you Christine's time.
I'm not going to bore you too much more. I just urge you to look at this bill. Let's at least get it to the floor so we can have some honest discussion about it. It's about time to quit kicking it down the road. Let's address it. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you. Questions, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony today. So from listening to your testimony, if the body or were against full legalization, House Bill 209, I guess I'm asking, your strongest interest would be medical marijuana. So if that were the case, your choice is that you're certainly for the medical marijuana.
Frank.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that would certainly be a correct assumption. My choice would be medical marijuana. I truly believe I'm a pretty darn conservative Republican, and I do not believe that the government should be regulating in any way on a plant. But that being said, the answer is yes. The medical part of it would be my biggest interest.
Committee, other questions? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lada? Lada. Thank you. So you mentioned that you don't think the government should regulate the plant. It's my knowledge that when medical marijuana is legalized, it comes in many different forms. How do you feel about oils and dabs and edibles, etc.? I can go on and on.
Representative Latta.
Mr. Chairman, I would say we're at the very beginning in the marijuana medical industry, and there are a lot of things, whether we're talking oils or we're talking smokable plant material, or we're talking eating brownies. We're at the very beginning of that, all of which have a place, whether it's a small amount of THC in an edible that a patient, such as an MS patient, takes on a daily basis to control some of their nerve problems and their appetite problems, can be handled with a very small edible or oil or a small dab. I think all of them play a role in our medical uses of it at this time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't think that we've come down to a point and said, this is it. This is the one thing we need to do. I think that's still an open book.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That answered my question.
Further questions? Thanks, Frank.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take one more from the room. Who wants to go next? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Judiciary Committee. My name is Susan Gore. I live in Lander and Cheyenne, and I'm speaking today as a private citizen, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I cannot say I have the credibility quite of Chairman Olson, because when Senator Scott was at Harvard, going to Harvard Business School, so was my husband. And at that time, they passed a toke. And I had the experience of inhaling and experiencing the dopamine rush. Now, I haven't gone beyond that much, but I think a lot of people in Wyoming know what that is. We estimate that about 16% of Wyoming uses, and probably about 6% heavy users. That's pretty big. But my main point here is to plea for the brains of the children of Wyoming. I've been speaking with a neonate nurse, and there is such a thing as a fetal marijuana syndrome. I estimate, this is my estimation, but it's probably not off, and you can see what your figures come up with, that about 5% of the Wyoming babies are born with fetal alcohol syndrome. It comes especially if the mother binges on alcohol. I know because we were looking for babysitters. One of the people, friends of mine, she called 30 mothers in the area of Cheyenne to see if they could, or other people, to see if they could help her with her childcare problem because the daycare was closed. Every single one said she was using marijuana. And I know that marijuana is particularly promoted to young women, as well as to children. We know from the way the gummy bears and the brownies come. And we also know, as addressing Representative Williams, that there's very high dose. And so they really don't know. We know that according to CDC, the addiction rate for adults used to be about 1 in 10. I mean, I didn't get addicted from my experience of the dopamine rush, but 9 people are getting away with it. Now it's changed. The addiction rate for adults is 3 in 10, and the addiction rate for children is 1 in 3, because the dosage have gone up. Now, I would like to address, first of all, there is a legal way to obtain medical marijuana. According to Dr. Mansell, he's a pain doctor in Gillette. He says you can get a prescription for Marinol. That is a THC form. They complained that it was created in the laboratory, but we know a lot of other things on the market are created in the laboratory. So there is a legal means, but the people don't use it. And I'm wondering, right now, we just heard from this gentleman about his use of medical marijuana for his problem, but we don't hear anybody, the kids whose brains are getting rewired, can't testify. Now, a baby born with his mother using alcohol, or his mother using marijuana has equivalent deficits. And they are shown in the literature to be lifetime deficits. So when we speak to people in Colorado or anywhere, it's not just in Colorado, there's an increase in damaged babies. These babies' brains are rewired because our natural endo
Ms. Gore,
system. Yes.
15-second warning, sorry.
Am I out of time?
I'm letting you go, but yeah, just bring us to a close.
Okay. Well, basically, we have cannabinoids in our body, and they direct the growth or the foundation of the brain. So the younger the person or the baby, the more damage is done to the brain. And that's because when you bring in these foreign cannabinoids, it interferes with the wiring of the brain. So I would plead with you, as Representative Washut has said, to be very completely informed. And I also would add that there's something called agreed trained mind. That's a mind that has, because marijuana is highly profitable to the people who are in the business. So people could make money on land sales or marketing or distributing. And I know that that's in the air. But I would also, Chairman, address your particular inevitability argument. It's not inevitable. It's not done everywhere. There was a poll here and a poll there. But most people in marijuana do not use. And if they use, they're discreet about it. And so I would think that we just let things be and let people come here in peace. And we do know as a fact, and this is the last thing I'll say, whenever a state legalizes, whether it's Colorado or Michigan or anywhere, use goes up and there are more damaged brains of kids. Really, the college kids say their brain hasn't developed till the age of 27. Thank you, Chairman Ullman.
Thank you, Ms. Gore. Questions for Ms. Gore? Ms. Gore, I feel honored that my bill brought you personally to testify
Yes, it is.
as opposed to anyone from your group, but I feel very honored that
Yes,
I got you to testify
yes,
on it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's go to our virtual world. Is it Donna? Is it Rachel, or I think I'd
Yes.
see Rachel, Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, I admitted individuals from the Wyoming State Crime Lab.
Oh, okay. We don't want to skip over the crime lab. Crime lab, light up your. There you go. Yeah, I think it's Rachel. You can turn on your camera and then we can see you.
The host has stopped our video feed.
Oh. Try again, maybe.
Hello.
Hi, Crime Lab. Introduce yourselves. And
Okay,
if you have anything, please.
Sure. I'm Sarah Barrett with the Wyoming State Crime Lab. I'm the Chemistry and Toxicology Unit Leader. And with me, I have Rachel Chavez, and she's an analyst in our Toxicology Department. And we are available if you guys have any questions for us.
Oh, we could probably give Representative Washut an hour, but we'll.
Thank you for the hour, Mr. Chairman. I just want to know about staffing and workload issues at the crime lab. I think we've cut a number of positions there over the last few years. And if this bill were to pass, what would be the impact on your facility? Do you have enough people and those sorts of things?
So chemistry and toxicology specifically have been impacted significantly in recent years. As you may be aware, we stood up a toxicology unit over the last few years, and that was done with no additional staffing or resources. And so what happened was we pulled from our chemistry unit. Chemistry is responsible for analysis of suspected controlled substances, which are brought in throughout the state. And so when we brought on toxicology, 3 of our chemistry analysts went to toxicology, became trained in that subject matter, and are now working the blood kit and urine kits, which are submitted from law enforcement throughout the state. So right now we have a pretty good handle on our toxicology work. We have a really good process, and we have currently 4 people in that section. But what happened is our chemistry unit has suffered, and so there's a significant backlog there. We have 4 analysts currently. We have 2 more which are in the hiring process, and we hope to bring on board soon. I feel that probably is a little less than what we actually need to be really efficient at our work of analyzing controlled substances for the state.
I think Representative Washington's working on a budget amendment to restore some positions.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, ladies, for being here. And if I could, you're a little quiet. If you could try to speak up. So what I'm interested in is the ability or what the ability is for detection of current THC levels as it pertains to driving impaired. So if you could discuss that.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I believe Rachel is best qualified to answer that question.
All right. Rachel, just scream into the computer.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Probably as good as it'll get, I imagine, but you're okay.
Okay. Right now we are able to identify THC and its metabolites in blood and urine samples in relation to DUI. Right now our limit of detection for THC is 1 nanogram per mil to actually quantitate that in a blood sample. And the same is for the metabolite 11 or hydroxy THC. The limit of detection for that is 1 nanogram per mil. And then for another metabolite of THC, the limit of detection is, or limit of quantitation, I'm sorry, is 5 nanograms per mil.
Follow up, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what about elimination rates of THC, and how is that relevant to being able to prosecute and detect THC levels, current THC levels at the time of the blood draw?
So unfortunately right now we are not able to back extrapolate to the THC concentration at the time of the stop versus the time that the blood was drawn. There just is not enough research out there, and it is unfortunately not eliminated in a constant rate the way alcohol is, which is why we can do back extrapolation for alcohol. I think there's some research that needs to be done as far as the elimination rates when it comes to THC. Unfortunately, we are not able to do that right now.
Yep. Go ahead, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is that testing available in other states, or is it simply unavailable as it, scientifically right now as it relates to THC?
Elimination rate testing or just THC testing in general?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both, really. I'm just wondering if, for both as it relates to what we can and cannot do in Wyoming, or if it's available at all.
Okay. Mr. Chair, THC confirmation testing is available in Wyoming. It's the first class of drugs that we got validated when we got tox up and running, because we knew that it was going to be very common in the population. So we are able to confirm and quantitate THC in the blood and urine. There are private labs available to do it as well. As far as elimination rates, I'm sure that would be more of like a federally sponsored research project or something that we would not be involved in. We don't have anything to do with elimination rates. We just read the literature as much as we can during our training process to get the background knowledge on that, but I'm not super familiar with any information in regards to elimination rates.
Thank you.
Further questions for the crime lab? Might have to have a whole day to go back and review the old files of the Judiciary Committee when we studied the testing. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate you making yourself available and appreciate you being able to answer some of our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Well, it's, you know, it's very good. Representative Washut was wondering if we needed one of those buildings too. Which actually reminds me, I'll see if I can, I don't know, do we have, Donna, is Department of Corrections by chance in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, if there's someone from the Department of Corrections, they haven't identified themselves. I don't recognize a name. I did admit one more person to testify just now, Luke Niforatos.
Okay, let's go. Is it Luke? Let's go to Luke.
Yep, Luke Niforatos. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm here representing, I'm from Colorado. I'm a dad, 2 daughters, living legalization firsthand. I'm representing Republic Free Choice. I'm also the Executive Vice President for SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, leading nonprofit, nonpartisan voice on this issue. And I know we only got a little bit of time, but Chair, I want to thank you for this very thoughtful way in which you're approaching this issue. I understand where you're coming from, though I disagree with where you've arrived. What I want to talk about is just the impact of legalization on youth, what we're seeing statistically and from the data, what we're seeing in the black market, and what we're seeing in revenue. And before I get into that, I just want to point out, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about inevitability of legalization in other states and federally. President Biden was the only Democrat to openly, repeatedly reject supporting legalization, and he was elected. So we know from the federal level, the administration's not on board with that. A number of states have rejected legalization in the last few years. And really, when you ask people what they're interested in, obviously there's an interest in reform in marijuana laws, but most people, to the liberty point, want to respect kind of individual liberties to use. But when you ask them, do they want pot shops? Do they want commercialized marijuana? That's where they really don't like it. And I think we heard a little bit about that from some of the previous testimony of your colleagues in your legislature. The final thing I want to say too is Virginia. I understand Virginia's bill is the model for this bill. Virginia just passed their legalization bill a few weeks ago. It has not been implemented. It will not be implemented for 4 years. It goes live in 2024. So we don't know what the outcomes of that model will look like, but we can look to the states that have legalized, and we have to look at the data. So, here in Colorado and in other states, we're seeing youth use increase. California, over the last 2 years, has seen a 25% increase in youth using marijuana. Nevada saw a 40% increase in the last 2 years in youth using marijuana. This is all, I think we can tie this to a more permissive, more promotion of marijuana atmosphere, which I'm really concerned about. We've also seen a 25% increase in youth cannabis use disorder. So that's addiction to marijuana in all states that have legalized marijuana. So we're seeing some concerning data coming out of states that have chosen to legalize. And we need to think about that for the downstream effects, which I acknowledge the chair and others on the committee probably don't want anything, they don't want these negative outcomes, but we've got to think about them. The second thing is we're told, let's legalize marijuana, we'll get rid of the black market. I wish that were the case. If that were the case, I might support it. But what we've seen is the cartels and the gangs and the drug dealers have made more money than ever since legalization. California Governor Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat, came out on the record to the New York Times and said the black market's getting worse, not better, since California legalized marijuana. That's in the New York Times just from last year, I believe, or 2 years ago. He's called in the National Guard to help fight the cartels and the massive illegal grow operations that they have going on in that state. So very big concerns on the black market side. And also this idea of regulation kind of goes with it. The state of Oregon, their state police report found that only about 30% of the entire marijuana market in Oregon is legal. So 70% of Oregon's marijuana consumed is black market weed. So it's a huge issue across a number of the states that you look at that have legalized. They have not been able to tamp down this illegal market. And finally, and I know I'm
was almost
for
perfect
time.
timing, Luke.
Thank you.
Right.
If I could just get one last point out.
15 more seconds.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you. The revenue here is a misnomer. We're promised revenues. Colorado U.S. Senator now, John Hickenlooper, says revenue is a drop in the bucket. Don't legalize marijuana for the money. You won't see it. It's about 0.89% of the Colorado state budget. That's what our marijuana tax revenue is. You look in other states, it's less than that. So this is not going to be a boon to state coffers. And you also have to think about all these other downstream costs. So with all of that said, I would urge you to please oppose this legalization bill. And related to the study bill, I would say it should be a question of if your state should have medical marijuana, not a question of how, which I think is how the bill is structured now. I will yield the rest to the floor, and thank you, Chair, for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Larson.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to know if you have any information on, do you see increased hospital issues, and how do they affect other people that don't want to use the hospital? I mean, I've heard it's pretty dramatic.
Luke?
Chair, I thank you. Representative, excellent question. I mean, all the questions from this entire committee that I've heard so far today have been excellent. So thank you for your insightful question. We are seeing a huge increase in hospitalizations, ER visits, and poison control center calls in all states that have legalized marijuana. Colorado saw a triple-digit percentage increase in hospitalizations. That increase has sustained. There was some question early on at maybe the first 2 years or so of legalization, people are trying pot edibles for the first time and they're going to the hospital. Maybe that trend will go down. We're about 7 years into it now in Colorado, and that trend continues to increase. So, hopeful that that'll go down, but that is an issue. We're seeing it in Oregon and Washington State as well, those significant increases there as well. So there's a lot of there's this misnomer out there that marijuana is not harmful, and that nobody would ever go to the hospital for marijuana. And when states legalize, I don't think it's the intention of the people who wrote those bills to say, oh, marijuana is harmless. But the industry is very much interested in driving more use. And obviously, if the industry says our products are harmful, less people are going to use them. So it's not in their profit incentive interest to say, well, you really should watch it with these high potency concentrates and other things. So that's where we're seeing the issue with the hospitalization. So excellent question. Chair.
Hey, Donna, can you make me a host, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Representative Washit? Oh, you have a follow-up. I'm sorry, Representative Larson.
Thank you. I don't talk too much, but
I know you're throwing me off, Representative Larson.
I want to jump in.
Go ahead.
I guess I have a question. I think in this bill, it says you can have 12 plants grown at your house. And if that's not right, somebody can let me know. Have you seen in other states that 12 plants is plenty and maybe 1 or 2 would be a better
Chair, thank you. Representative, there's a lot of, the home grow question is I will say it's a very convoluted policy issue that you all could probably spend several years holding hearings on and still not get to the bottom of, just to be completely honest. There are some who say we should have no home grow because it can be a boon for the black market. There are others who say we need to reject this, now tobacco invested marijuana industry, and shouldn't have big commercial interests, and it should only be home grow. And that's really liberty, is growing it in your backyard, having the right to use it, but no commercial sales. I see arguments on all sides of that issue. What I will say is 12 plants is an extreme amount for somebody to have to use only for personal use. I can tell you, this is anecdotal, but from personal experience, friends of mine, have medical marijuana cards, for example, and they get way more weed than they need, and they sell the rest of it to their friends to make money. So that certainly is a temptation for folks. I don't know how law enforcement would ever be able to fully track down everyone who is illegally growing marijuana and then selling it to other folks. I think that's a huge regulatory issue just in and of itself. So that is I think it's a very convoluted question, and it's a good one you bring up, and it needs to be fleshed out.
Representative Williams? And then I'm going to move on to another witness, just so you know, Wash it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Luke. Just want to touch on your comment about increased illegal or the black market and an increase in cartel activity. I'm well aware that illegal grow operations utilize chemicals that are federally illegal in the United States, and the cartels smuggle them up from Mexico. Wyoming has beautiful streams and lakes and rivers. I just wanted to know if you can speak to whether or not you've seen any diverted waters or increased chemicals in your streams and beautiful spots in Colorado. Thank you.
Luke, even though it may not be a fair question because the streams aren't as beautiful in Colorado as they are here in Wyoming, please attempt to answer that.
Chair, duly noted on your comment there, though being from Colorado, I will just have to say no comment. But Representative, I thank you for your question. Another good one. You've had some excellent questions today. I think the environmental impact is significant. There's, again, this kind of mythical notion that when you legalize marijuana, it's an organic, homegrown, homespun initiative where it's not corporate at all. And really what happens is it's a totally corporate industry. It's a for-profit market, of course, in a capitalist society. So what we have is massive operations that take place, whether they're indoor grows or outdoor grows. They use a lot of chemicals that actually have killed off a number of endangered species of spotted owls, for example, and other species in California that they're very concerned about. The plants require an enormous amount of water. And so that's another environmental concern, is how much water these plants require, as well as electricity, which is another huge issue. So there are a lot of environmental impacts that come with this that I think are a concern, and we have to think about what that impact will be. Chair, I know you want to get on to another person to testify, but I'll just end saying this. We've seen the tobacco industry put more than $2 billion in the marijuana industry. Altria, Philip Morris, those guys caught doing a lot of horrible things, killing a lot of people with their cigarettes. They ran the bill actually in Virginia. They're the ones who got that bill across the finish line.
Sorry, Luke, I
So,
got
very
to keep on the question. I really appreciate you. I'd love to spend an entire interim with you, and hopefully we'll get to do that. But it's not that I don't love the questions, I don't love the testimony. It's that I have so many folks that want to testify that I just want to make sure everyone gets an equal opportunity, and I'm struggling to get through everyone as it is, and I doubt everyone will be able to testify. But we do appreciate your testimony, appreciate the great questions.
Understood. And Chair, thank you for your service. Thank you all for your service. God bless.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Judge Jim Gray. You're up next.
Well, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to share thoughts with good people. My name is Judge Jim Gray, and a little bit about my background. I was a Navy JAG attorney, criminal defense attorney. Then I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, and then a trial court judge for 25 years here in Orange County. I retired 12 years ago now, I say, but as I tell people in my mediations, I became a judge when I was 11 years old. That's why I'm still so young, and I don't allow any questioning on that whatsoever. But I did something very unusual for a sitting trial court judge back in 1992, and I held a press conference and told anyone who would listen that, look, our program of drug prohibition has failed. We have caused so much crime, so much corruption. Even down in Mexico, the crime, the corruption, the beheadings have nothing to do with drugs. It's all drug money that has caused those. And I'm sure it's the same thing in Wyoming. And while I was on the bench, I still remember on two different occasions, two different young men, they were pleading guilty to, it's called Health and Safety Code 11550 in California, being under the influence of methamphetamines. And in California, and probably there in Wyoming, before someone can plead guilty, they have to give what we call a factual basis. That is, put in your own words why you're guilty of this offense. And each one separately said, Your Honor, my drug of choice is marijuana. And for years, I would buy marijuana from the same supplier. One fine day, they sold me some marijuana laced with methamphetamines. I put it in my bong, I smoked it, and I got hooked. And I still remember thinking to myself, look, we all know that smoking cigarettes is dangerous, hazardous to your health, but at least when you smoke a pack of Marlboros, you get it from the local mini mart, you're going to know it's not laced with methamphetamines. Quality control is a huge, huge issue. And if you go to the term controlled substances, I believe it's the biggest oxymoron in our world today, because as soon as you prohibit a substance, you give up all of your controls to the bad guys. You're talking about polluting streams and diverting water. That's done by illegal marijuana growers. You talk about the pesticides and the rest. You don't have any testing in illegal marijuana. So I'm not going to quibble with you, but I'd like to call your attention to a term that you're using that I think is erroneous. No state in the United States of America has legalized marijuana. None. You're not talking about legalizing marijuana at all. You're talking about regulating and controlling marijuana, basically like alcohol. So if you think of a legalized substance, think aspirin. You know, your 12-year-old daughter could go to your local pharmacy and buy a case of it if she wanted to, but that's not what we're talking about. And no one wants young people to smoke marijuana. And by the way, Chairman Olson, I'm with you. I've never used marijuana at all, and I don't plan on it. But, you know, ask the next 10 teenagers you find. You don't need to bring them in to testify. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find, like I have. What is easier for you to get if you want to, marijuana or alcohol? And every last one of them will tell you, if they wanted to, it would be easier to get marijuana. Why? Because the least concern for a legal marijuana dealer is age restrictions. They're in it for the money. And I would commend to you, and again, I don't have all the answers, I prove that with regularity, but I would commend to you to reduce your taxes from 30%, maybe down to 20%, maybe down to 15%. It will not increase usage of marijuana. It will increase usage of regulated and controlled marijuana, because California, marijuana has been the largest cash crop in the state of California for the last number of decades. Number two is grapes, by the way. So it's there, it's being used. Let's regulate it, control it, and tax it less. Your last witness said, and he's right, California still has a large black market, mostly because we make its regulation so cumbersome and the taxes so high that most people still go to the black market. But we should lower those taxes. It will not particularly increase marijuana usage. It will decrease alcohol usage, by the way, which is also, I'm convinced that my drug of choice, which is alcohol, is more dangerous than marijuana is. But final thing, the best address program we have had with regard to a mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug is what we've done with cigarettes. Just because if you're over 18 years of age, it's not illegal to smoke cigarettes, does not mean that government condones smoking cigarettes. And we have then gotten into honest education. Cigarette usage has decreased once you get honest information out there in the public. And I think the same thing will happen with regard to marijuana, and you can avoid a whole lot of fraud, a whole lot of activity. We in California, I expect you do as well, have juvenile street gangs that use the sale of illegal marijuana as a recruiting tool. Not a good result. So all of these things go into the equation. You're not condoning the use of marijuana. You're putting honest information into the workplace, into the society, and yes, you're generating some revenue and taking a lot of money away from Mexican drug cartels, a lot of the illegal motorcycle gangs or whatever, and a lot of thugs. So those are my comments. I'm anxious to hear questions if you wish.
Thank you, Judge. And you just went 17 seconds over, so I appreciate you staying right on the timer, and I was hesitant to interrupt the judge.
Chairman, judges don't get paid by the word like attorneys do, so we're much more expeditious.
Questions? I don't know how you even ask a question at this point, but questions, committee? All right. Thank you, Judge. We appreciate you making yourself available and testifying today.
Thank you for what you're doing. Good luck to you. I strongly do recommend that you pass HB 209. May I just say also that probably HB 82 is unnecessary, because you're going to hear from a Dr. Berman today, who I know is very, very well versed with regard to medical usage of marijuana and its impact. So give him a listen. But thanks again. I wish you well.
Thank you, Judge. Brett? This is an unusual place to see you in the Judiciary Committee, but welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. The policy of my members is wide and varied. Sitting in opposition to this bill, my members have had policy for before I started here, which was 15 years ago, against marijuana. We don't believe it should be legalized in Wyoming. I do have to point out it is still an illegal substance at the federal level. We don't believe it should be legalized at the state level. We don't believe it should be legalized at the federal level. The long-term impacts of using marijuana, as I understand it, are unknown. When I attended a symposium by the Peace Officers Association a few years ago on this topic, the black market did not go down after you legalized marijuana in Colorado. It actually went up. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll try to be as short as possible. I know you got a lot of other people, but sitting in opposition to this bill for Farm Bureau, as per my members' policy, and for that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Thanks, Brett. Questions? Committee? Thank you. And it's good to see you in the Judiciary Committee.
May you all get home tonight.
Well, that's another story. We may have to just hold session on a Saturday.
As long as we can just be Zoom mates, and as long as we can do it, we'll do it.
All right. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
In the room wishing to testify, raise your hand. Sheila.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sheila Bush with the Wyoming Medical Society. I will be brief. Just listening to this morning's testimony and the discussion today, I wanted to be clear, the Medical Society is opposed to medical marijuana. Having said that, we don't have a position on the other things in front of you today. And to explain that a little bit, it might feel confusing. With the FDA not yet having a way or a mechanism to approve medicinal pharmaceutical marijuana, and since it's a Schedule I and hasn't been moved, there isn't a mechanism for controlled studies and evidence that give prescribing practice or guidance to physicians to do that safely. So having said that, you can find a host of physicians, especially those among my membership and on my board, who anecdotally recognize the value and the role for marijuana with patients. The stories are fascinating. They're really interesting, but it doesn't change their position on medical, because what that means is you have a population and a desired substance, and you put physicians as gatekeepers in the middle, and then they kind of hung out to dry in a sense, because there isn't any evidence around how to safely make those recommendations. And so until that schedule is moved from a 1 to a 2, where the FDA takes an active role in putting some guidance and evidence around this substance, physicians don't want to be put in a position to be those gatekeepers. So with that, the study seems like a really good idea. I don't want my testimony to be interpreted as against either of these bills. I just did want to be on the record that the Medical Society is opposed to medical marijuana for those reasons, and the lack of ability to surround physicians with evidence on how to safely do that. There's liability concerns. There's a host of things, recognizing that in some ways, and again, anecdotally, because we don't have the studies in at least robust studies, there are times in which marijuana can be a better option than some of the pharmaceuticals available to them with 2 pages of side effects, right? Especially around affordability. And as the conversation in the country continues around opioid addiction, certainly a role for it there. But the formal position of the Medical Society is opposed to medical. Our board doesn't have a position on recreational, but I did want to just make sure that that was on the record and clear, and that we're here and available as a resource.
Questions for Ms. Bush? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. My question then, you certainly discussed with doctors in other states, or I'm asking, I guess, but so how are doctors in states that have legalized marijuana, certainly medical marijuana, how are they handling the challenges and prescribing?
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, go ahead.
Representative Oakley, thank you. I don't feel equipped to speak on behalf of the other physicians. I know that there was a lot of concern around the word recommendation instead of prescription. It really is it's a misnomer that a physician would be able to, quote, prescribe an illegal substance in the state. That's not something that's available. This morning, there was some testimony around pharmacies. They also wouldn't have a role in this process, right? It's more of a I guess if you were to envision a physician who has a patient with a condition that they think there is evidence to support that marijuana could be a good option, I think that they would be able to make that recommendation, or at least have that conversation be legal that they're not breaking the law by saying, we don't know for sure, but you could try, or you could, it could be recommended that you try these things. These are the options available to you. So in Colorado, physicians can say, for a rheumatoid arthritis patient or someone with chronic pain, it may behoove you to look into these options that are medical marijuana and go to a dispensary, but it's not a prescription in those states where it's fully legal.
Representative Oakley?
That's interesting. Thank you. So how, before they did full legalization in Colorado, they did medical, and people I know, and I mean, I had a friend, so she said they were 15-minute appointments. You went and said, hey, I got back pain, whatever. You got your medical marijuana card. Where did they take that then? If that was pre-dispensaries? I guess I'm interested now. I think this would be where we would be if we did medical.
If you know, Ms. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. I think that it raises a good question about the fraud and abuse that can happen in just a strict medical marijuana authorization, which gets into it. Another reason that we're opposed to medical marijuana and positioning these physicians as card holders or givers or some permission grantor. They don't want to be put in that position.
Committee, Representative Washit.
Thank
Does
you,
the
Mr.
Medical Society need a building?
I'm doing budget amendments today. Ms. Bush, thank you for being here. I think I heard you correctly, and I just want to verify that one of the concerns on the physician side in terms of medical marijuana is that we don't have good research about dosing, how much to prescribe, and that other medicines, we don't say take as much as you want whenever you want. Is that your testimony?
Ms. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I wish you would have given my testimony for me. You probably would do a better job. Yes. I think reliability, consistency in the substance, knowing where the substance is originating, where it's being grown, dosing. We've learned a lot, again, anecdotally from our neighbors that there isn't a lot of consistency. That when people think of marijuana, sometimes they think about marijuana of a few decades ago or a decade ago where THC levels were far lower than some of what's being grown now. I just think there's a lot of question marks. I think that speaks even further to studies being a good idea. But you're correct, and yes.
Committee, no other questions? Thank you, Ms. Bush. Mr. Winnie, and then we'll go to our virtual world.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I spent 30 years active duty in the Navy, an awful lot of that undergoing random urinalysis for various drugs, including marijuana. Started out in the late 70s as an outfall from the Vietnam era with nuclear weapons and other nuclear operators in the Navy, and then expanded to the full Navy. Along the way of my career, as I went through prospective commanding officer training, we spent a day with medical people in part to prepare us to be a Article 15 hearing officer, essentially justice of the peace, where we would make decisions. They talked specifically about marijuana. There is zero utility for it, and it is in fact harmful. The reason we started doing the nuclear weapons personnel testing was because in the long term, it affects your brain very clearly. I would remark, to the extent that the medical world wishes to experiment and do things like that in search of an actual use, that our laws should in fact allow that. That's something for the medical people to decide, but otherwise, I believe it should remain fully illegal. And so I don't support the bills. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Questions for Mr. Winnie? Always a pleasure. To our virtual world, Mr. Areola, is it?
That's correct.
All right, please introduce yourself and tell us what you need us to hear.
Hi, my name is Justin Areola, and I just wanted to take a second to applaud the fact that your committee is looking at this subject and discussing it. I've heard many viewpoints today that I'd like to just kind of run down a few issues. A lot of what's being discussed is old data. What we do now have is many states with very mature cannabis programs, and we have a lot of good data, post-market data, similar to like what a pharmacy would collect on other pharmaceutical uses. I'm also a Navy veteran, so I guess I can talk a little bit about my background really quickly. I am a patient advocate. I've been involved in the industry for a number of years. And so I do have a wide lens when it comes to cannabis and use, and also helping states deal with regulatory programs. I'm currently working in Utah, which is a very conservative state. We have a highly regulated medical program. And so I'd like to just talk to you about a few things that I've heard today, and just some discussion points here. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about, what I've heard is some varying testimony as far as addiction rates. There's a very clear number of studies who have dealt with addiction rates with cannabis use. Depending on the study that you're looking at, that looks to be between 6 to 9% of a propensity for addiction. Now, having said that, the difference with cannabis is if I'm addicted to opiates and I take too much, I don't wake up in the morning. With cannabis use, the addiction profile is much safer, if you can say that, so that if somebody were to overdose or have an adverse reaction to cannabis, that use doesn't end up with a death. So the fatality profile of cannabis versus other substances that are already being used in your state is dramatically lower. It's a very safe substance when you consider it from a fatality standpoint. One of your other testimony or person that testified from Sam mentioned the tax revenues and the money not being there. I just wanted to call attention to that in his home state, for 2020, they raised $244 million in tax revenue from cannabis. And over $60 million of that went to actual law enforcement and interdiction to deal with the black market. Since they legalized their program in 2014, they've raised $1.5 billion in tax revenue. They've given over $130 million to their school program, and over $75 million to their state law enforcement programs. So the fact that when we talk about the money not being there in dealing with taxes, having the right level of tax associated with this product can be very beneficial to your state, and can also be used to treat substance abuse for other compounds. So one of the other things that money goes to is opioid use and treatment, the methamphetamine problem that many of the states have, and I know Wyoming has their own issues there. I also like to talk about opioid use. So in a state that has a legalized program, on average, you see about a 25% reduction in the use and abuse of opiates. I know Wyoming has had a problem with opioid use and overdose. So that is something that you guys should consider as a possible offset to considering cannabis legislation. When we talk about medicinal benefits and being recognized as a medicine, the DEA has actually come out last year and has recognized that cannabis has a medicinal benefit, as has the FDA. So currently, there is a cannabis product in the market called Epidiolex. It is actually being prescribed by doctors. It is a full spectrum cannabis oil, and it is approved and readily prescribed. So we are already setting precedent for the ability to prescribe compounds that contain cannabis, that there are already titration mechanisms specifically with that medicine, but also generally, there are a number of doctors in states who are 10, 15 years into a legalized program. So when you talk about medicine and being titrated, there are a number of compounds in medical pharmacies. Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but let you go over a little bit. Can you drive us home?
Sure. Yeah, the point that I'm trying to make is, you guys have talked about whether this is coming or not. The Biden administration has actually talked about their willingness to look at a national legalization program. I think you're right in looking at this as an opportunity for you guys to take control of a substance that's already in your state, that's already currently being used. And the fact that you can control the narrative before the narrative comes knocking on your door. Being able to set sensible policies around regulation would be a very smart move and very progressive for your state, in that you can set programs in place that would, one, deal with the use, being able to control access for youth, but also set revenue to the state. And finally, when we talk about youth use, actually in Colorado, last year they had a slight uptick in youth use, but it's still lower than pre-regulatory levels. So before they legalized, they had a ever tried in your life statistic of about 38%. That statistic has gone down to about 21.7% or 21.5%, and they're actually 0.2% lower than the national average. So the misnomer is that if you legalize medical cannabis, that your youth use is going to go up. And what we actually see is there are multiple studies in multiple states, and you guys can look at this if you need to, where that use is actually declined. So that's something that has been pumped in the state as a fear tactic, but it's not actually accurate.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, Mr. Ariola, I gotta.
Nope, that's great. Thank you
I
for your
gotta cut
time.
you
I
off. Thank you.
appreciate being able
Appreciate
to.
it. Committee, do you have questions for Mr. Ariola? Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ariola. I have two questions,
Yes, ma'am.
if that's
You
okay.
can have as many questions as you'd like.
Thank you, sir. The first one I just want to speak to or ask is you use the word death in your testimony there. I want to know if the cause of marijuana use, it obviously differs among people when it comes to side effects and behaviors. Do you believe that there could be a correlation between the side effects of use and death? And then
You want to do that question first?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Ariola.
Sure. So as far as a correlation between using cannabis and an increased death rate, is that what you mean?
Not death rate, just death.
Okay, so there's actually a very concrete LD50 number for cannabis. The amount of you would have to consume an amount that would be similar to about 6 tons of cannabis product in one session in order for it to have some type of effect on your body that could potentially cause death, not necessarily concretely will cause death. So it'd be safer to say that that falling on your head would kill you before using that amount of compound. The LD50 numbers for cannabis have been clearly established, and it's so high that it's almost impossible for you to use enough cannabis products to cause a fatality incident. Does that answer your question?
Representative Williams.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ariola, not necessarily. I guess I was speaking in regards to behavior specifically that different people experience due to use, and a correlation between those side effect behaviors and death.
Yes, and honestly, that's a great question, because what we see is a lot of the adverse events for people who are using cannabis products come from an unregulated market. So they have access to products that, there's cannabis in your state. Everyone in this room knows that. What usually happens with an adverse event is they receive a product that there has been no testing for. They have no idea what the potency is. They're told, oh, it's probably 50 milligrams or something like that, or 20 milligrams or 10 milligrams, whatever that dosage is. There's been no tests. There's no homogenization. And so when they take these products, they could be receiving an adverse event because that product was made in somebody's kitchen or made with product that they had no idea what the strength or potency was before they made it. Whereas in a regulated market, all of these testing profiles are clearly established. The typical dose would be somewhere around 10 milligrams. And when people are first-time users, they're often told to take, cut that in half, cut that in fourths. And not anybody that is currently dispensing cannabis products in a legal market wants their patients to have adverse effects because they want to be able to provide a medicinal benefit. And so where we see the most adverse effects are from an unregulated market, and Judge Gray is correct. If you regulate it and establish a clear guideline, you will have way more control over the events that are occurring in your state regarding cannabis use, because it's there now.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Ariola. If I can proceed with my next question.
Sure.
Thank you,
And if
Mr.
it's
Chair.
medical, just to let you know, the next one up is a doctor that I have in the waiting room. So if It's up to you. If you want to ask it to Mr. Ariola, or we can let the good doctor in.
I'll ask Mr. Ariola.
Please. go
Thank you.
ahead.
So you talked about taxes and I had a constituent send me some information as to the amount that's spent in Colorado on regulation. And the last data that I received was that they spend $4.50 to regulate for every dollar that's collected in taxes. Is that correct?
I would say that's probably not correct, but the tax revenue data that I got came directly from Colorado government website. So all of that data is readily available, and they've collected a lot of that data because of some of the misnomers around what it costs to regulate the program versus what the patients are actually paying in tax revenue or revenue being generated. So from that aspect, I would say that if you look at $244 million, which was what was collected in 2020, I'm 100% confident that it didn't cost them almost $1 billion to regulate that program for the year. So, that being said, there is factual data from taxes from the Colorado website, and many states that have regulated programs have that data readily available. What we see oftentimes is that people hear anecdotals, or they get data from sources that may not have the latest and greatest or factual data at all. And then it increases every time somebody hears it. It's this, it's that, but there is hard data actually available. And again, if it was $4.50 for every dollar collected, that would mean that they spent $1 billion regulating their program, and that's just not factual.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Additional questions for Mr. Ariola? No? Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. We got one more from I think our Zoom world, then we'll come back to the in-person world. Dr. Berman, you're next on deck. Dr. Berman, if you can hear us, you can turn on your video feed and unmute and introduce yourself to the committee. And if not, we can circle back. It's probably doing important doctor things. All right. Okay, next in the virtual world is Lincoln Chafee. Mr. Chafee, former governor of Rhode Island and former senator, now resident of Wyoming. That's kind of fun. That's why I love Judiciary. Mr. Chafee, if you would like to join us, you can turn on your camera and unmute. Could be another Lincoln Chafee. Nope. All right. Let's pause the virtual world and come back to the in-person world. Yes, you in the back. And then Zach.
Chairman Olson.
I'm going to guess Patrick.
Thank you very much. I'm
Is it-
Patrick Gonzalez, former CEO with the Community Mental Health Center, and I haven't heard anybody from that field speak up on this issue. One of the things I do want to address, I've heard a lot of information from law enforcement about arrests and those types of things. And working in the mental health and substance use field, I can tell you that marijuana and the marijuana cases that come into our facilities are much lower and actually usually at the bottom of the list compared to alcohol, methamphetamines, opioids, and other drug use. So this idea that allowing marijuana to be used in the state of Wyoming is somehow going to escalate the number of people coming in to receive services, I think is unfair, and I think it's inaccurate. One of the things that, as we've heard a lot of discussion today, I think what it still boils down to is choice. I've heard many members of this committee saying that they don't want to be involved in regulating our lives, yet Shouldn't the choice to use marijuana be up to the citizen themselves? I have yet to hear anybody say anything against alcohol and alcohol use when that is our biggest problem, not only in the state, but nationwide. Nobody has a problem with that. I've seen many of your constituents after legislative meetings sitting in bars drinking until they can hardly walk. No one says a thing about that. I think it still boils down to choice. And we as American citizens and citizens in this community and of this state should have that choice. I think the judge from California made a very poignant statement. You're not legalizing it, you're just regulating it. Let us decide what we want to do. Let us decide what we want to use. And that's all I'm asking you. I support both of these bills and I hope it goes through. I heard this morning that Wyoming is a leader. Well, let's be a leader. Let's not continue to spread fear amongst our community and certainly not our state, but let's do what's right for everybody and let us make that choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to push back gently.
No problem.
I think we do say a lot in Wyoming about alcohol-related problems. We spend a ton of money addressing alcohol-related effects. Drunk driving, the governor's task force on drunk driving. In my community, the guy who drinks till he can barely walk, that's a criminal act in my community. So I think you kind of overstated it that we don't say anything about people abusing alcohol in our state.
I would agree with you there. My apologies, but working in that field and the number of clients that we see that come through with substance issues, and usually alcohol is the top one. The sad part in that, the reason why I said what I said, we can see numerous people that come through our shops and the community mental health and substance use facilities that have been there 3, 4, 5, 6 times before anything is actually done at a higher level. There's only so much we can do as a community mental health facility to help that individual. Obviously, that boils down to the individual themselves and how they want to help themselves and the care that they want to receive. Unfortunately, what we see on a regular basis, though, is alcohol and alcohol use is more to the extreme than any of the others are. And like I said, marijuana usage is usually at the very bottom of the list in most of our facilities. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm not speaking for any other community mental health center or any facilities in the state, but a great number of those directors and even clinicians see benefits with marijuana and the usage to some of their clientele. I'm not a clinician, but I have seen how cannabis use with those individuals with anxiety, PTSD, how it has helped them. Not in our facilities specifically, but I have seen people that do get treatment other places, and they have used cannabis to help them with that. So it is a benefit to those individuals what they use it. But again, like I said, it still boils down to choice. And I think we, as citizens of the state of Wyoming, should have that right and the choice to make that decision. Thank you.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly along the lines of what you just said, you said that you see some people use it to beneficial use, but certainly you do, or I guess I'm asking, do you see people with mental health issues use marijuana to self-medicate, and it creates issues and problems?
I have not. I'm not going to speak on that simply because I haven't witnessed that. I haven't seen that, Representative Oakley. I'm sure there have been studies for and against with that, but I've seen a lot more recently that those with mental health issues, that it does help de-escalate particular situations with those with higher levels of mental health problems. I'm not saying it works that way with everybody because I haven't seen it per se, but I do know that in some cases that yes, those people that do have some mental health issues, when they do use cannabis, it keeps them at much lower heightened anxieties and stress levels in their lives. So Again, I'm not speaking on scientific levels or a lot of data, just from, casual witnessing these types of things. So.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chafee. I just like clarification whether or
Well,
not you're.
this is Patrick.
Yes.
Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Gonzalez, that's all right.
Mr. Gonzalez. I apologize.
No, that's
I had to
okay.
look back at my notes for names. There's been a lot of
problem.
testimony going
No
on.
problem.
I just like clarification if you're testifying as an individual private citizen, or if you're representing a specific community mental health center that's funded by state dollars. And I just like further clarification as to what your credentials are.
Yeah, no, I am not responding as a former CEO of a community mental health center or that is funded by the Department of Health. I am speaking as a private citizen. My credentials, like I said, I am not a clinical worker. I have a master's degree in business, but I have worked in the community mental health and substance use field for 11 years as an executive. So while I am not clinical, but I have seen the effects, pros and cons of all the things that we've been discussing today, whether it's alcohol or cannabis or any other controlled substance.
Does that help, Representative Williams?
That does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. All right. We thank you
Thank
for
you,
your
Chairman.
testimony. Mr. Padilla.
Thank you. My name's Zach Padilla. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I live in Teton County, Wyoming. I am a small business owner. I own 2 different alcohol distribution companies. I am the chairhead of the Virginian Village HOA. I'm the chair of the Rotary Supper Club. I am the 3rd president of the Lions Club, and I can go on. It's not worth going into all those because the fact is I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a health expert. I'm not a psychologist. And there are some amazing speakers here that can testify to what's going on in the medical industry in regards to those subjects. I myself was a recreational user, and I made the poor choice to bring the product back to Wyoming and use it in the safety of my own home. And I was arrested and faced with a felony charge. Through the judicial system, I was able to go through a deferred adjudication program, which sent me to therapy that gave me a chance to talk about my issues, talk about my feelings. And being a small business owner, being an entrepreneur, being a philanthropist, a politician, I'm also the interim chairhead of the Teton County Libertarian Party currently. And as all that's gone on, it's been stressful. It's been frustrating, and there's a lot going on. I'm trying to be the best that I can for the community. I made a poor choice to use the product in a state where it was illegal. However, I want to make sure that as you're listening to these testimonies, as you're listening to these experts, that you consider the idea that using the product in the safety of your own home without risking others' lives, others' ability to function in society. For me, it was a way of taking a break, relaxing at the end of the day, and being able to move on to the next day and be as successful and helpful to the community as I possibly could. I hope you will consider when you're listening to these that there are more like me, that there's not, I'm not one of a kind. There's so many more people that are fighting so hard to work and live and support their families. And they use marijuana as a way of relaxing, just like a beer at the end of a hard shift. It's no different, and it shouldn't be treated any differently. I highly ask you to consider supporting House Bill 209.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Padilla? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Padilla. And I'm not trying to be, I hope this isn't embarrassing or something, but
Not at all.
I just do want to point out that you said, the use of your own home, use of marijuana is currently a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
I mean, just use is a misdemeanor. It's not a felony charge.
Good.
That guy likes me. So I won't ask.
Another individual that we have in the room,
Right.
who's struggling with his mic. It's not actually Mr. Chafee that we see on the screen. It's Dr. Berman, who we tried to let in earlier. He's having some technical difficulties. So anyway, please proceed.
I'm coming. I'm on.
All right,
you hear
Dr.
me?
Berman, and you're up next. So just give us a few seconds here to get through Representative Oakley's question, and then we'll get to you.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
We can move on.
All right.
Did you want me to clarify to that?
Did you want to answer the question?
Yeah,
that
I
you
didn't
assume it to
actually
be?
get the question. I apologize.
Well, I guess I'll just leave it as a statement because I don't want to get into
Okay.
anything.
Oh, it's
further.
not that big a deal. It was a felony charge because of the product that I had in possession. The misdemeanor was also the product that I had, from edibles to liquid cartridge, and that was the charge.
So it was a felony amount.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right. No further questions? Thank you, Mr. Padilla. All right, let's get that Mr. Berman, and then we'll try to finish up our online testimony with Mr. Chafee. Dr. Berman, you can unmute now. And if you can turn on your video, that's the only way we can see you, doctor. Zoom. All right, Doctor?
Okay, wait a minute, just a minute. Okay,
Okay.
all right, hang on.
All right. We see you, doctor. All right.
Hey,
Introduce.
oh my God. Well, as you can tell, I am not a high-tech guy. My name is Dr. David Behrman. I'm a graduate of the University of Washington. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin where I was friends with somebody that most of you probably know, Foster Freeze. We played basketball together and golf together. We were on the track team. My father was a pharmacist, and he was the first person who told me, even tangentially, that cannabis was medicine. He went to the University of Minnesota School of Pharmacy in 1928. One of their assignments was to make tincture cannabis. And he said we had to be very careful because the alcohol was illegal. Now, in the 1920s, American physicians wrote 3 million prescriptions a year that contained cannabis. In 1937, the American Medical Association's chief legal counsel, who was also a doctor, and the former Commissioner of Health in Washington, D.C. and Boston, past president of the American Public Health Association, testified against the Marijuana Tax Act for the AMA, saying that the AMA knows of no dangers from the medical use of cannabis. Cannabis has been a medicine for about 4,000 years. It's been in every major materia medica ever written. It was in the United States Pharmacopoeia starting in 1850, and it went to 1942. I have some appreciation for your position because I've served in special districts for over 36 years. I've worked at every level of government, including federal, state, local, and county, and I have 50 years experience involved in drug abuse treatment and prevention. And for the last 20 years, I've been practicing cannabinoid medicine and pain management. I'd like to give you a very short history of medical cannabis, a brief explanation of the endocannabinoid system. Why does this work? And why does it work on so many things? I want to discuss cannabinoids and terpenes. Those are the molecules that are in the plant that give it its therapeutic effect. I also want to talk about a couple of points that were made that turn out not to be so. One person did point out that Marinol is THC. This is what causes the euphoria and may cause dysphoria. Cannabis has 513 molecules in it, of which THC is one. 140 of those molecules are cannabinoids. Many of the cannabinoids have therapeutic benefit. The odor in cannabis comes from terpenes. There are more than 200 terpenes in cannabis. They're not unique to cannabis. Terpenes are found in spices, they're found in fruit, they're found in shrubs and pine trees, and many these terpenes, there are 20,000 terpenes in nature, have therapeutic value. Now, in terms of the practice of cannabinoid medicine, I'm the executive vice president of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine. We were founded in 2007, and our goal was to encourage the high quality practice of cannabinoid medicine. One of the things that you can do in Wyoming is to teach your doctors about the endocannabinoid system, which is the largest neurotransmitter system in the human body. Now, it's true that cannabis cannabis is a Schedule II drug, even though THC is Schedule I and Epidiolex is Schedule V, it's also true that Sativex is legal in 24 countries in the world. Some of you may have seen the Sanjay Gupta documentary in which they're showing Sativex being made. It's in a greenhouse that has 10,000 cannabis plants, and they're mixing these things together. So while the United States has not legalized cannabis, 24 other countries have legalized cannabis.
Hey,
Now,
Doctor,
in terms of the
Dr. Berman.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yep, sorry. Can you, I got you 15 more seconds. Just drive us home with your most valuable.
In terms of the
15-second point.
endocannabinoid system, it's the largest neurotransmitter system in the human body. It regulates the speed of neurotransmission. It down regulates the immune system, and it is important for homeostasis. Cannabis is useful in treating a wide number of medical conditions, and starting with the.
All right, Dr. Bierman, sorry, I got to mute you. I ran out of time. Any questions for Dr. Bierman? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate it, Dr. Bierman. But my question to you as a doctor, we've had some just really interesting testimony. How do you rectify the federal and state laws and the actual inability for doctors to prescribe it? Regardless, if I completely agree, it's a great thing. But what about that?
Doctor? Well, there are two ways to approach that, ma'am. One is that the government could make this Schedule II. The other is that the U.S. Constitution allows the states to regulate the practice of medicine. In fact, if you take a look at the dissent in Gonzalez versus Race, you'll find that the most conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court indicated that using interstate commerce was a ruse, and that the states could go ahead and actually allow cannabis to be prescribed. Right now, we're stuck with recommending it. One other thing that needs to be done is that you should require your medical schools or your doctors to be educated about the endocannabinoid system. And when you sell this, it should be sold in drugstores by pharmacists like my father who understand this, and not in dispensaries. Also, you should require education of bud tenders if you do decide to go with dispensaries.
Thank you, Dr. Bierman. Any other questions? We wish we had many hours with you, doctor. Unfortunately, we have 15 minutes to go, and then we're on third reading of our budget, which is a very important matter. So we appreciate you making yourself available. We appreciate hearing from you. Thank you, Dr. Bierman.
All right, can I say one other thing? If you have any questions, you can email me or read my book.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely. All right, Mr. Chafee, you will be our last public comment that we will take.
How we do?
Yeah, you just turned off your camera, Mr. Chafee.
Start.
There you go. Introduce yourself and tell us what you think we need to hear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lincoln Chafee. I'm a Teton County resident and I'm registered as a libertarian. I am in support of HB 209. When I was governor of Rhode Island from 2011 until 2015, I inherited from the previous administration a medical marijuana law. My administration had to implement this new law. Although well-intended, there were many difficulties with this halfway approach. In my opinion, HB 209 is a better bill. From my experience, I would also recommend keeping as much control as possible over every aspect of this endeavor. HB 209 will create a lucrative revenue stream. The powers and duties of the Department of Agriculture under 11-52-102 are well stated and important. We all want to see these revenues go to necessary government services and to keep taxes down. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Chafee? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to take a little privilege and say thank you for joining us, Mr. Chafee from Teton County. I really think we have a good approach here with the hybrid approach and letting people testify virtually. So now we have people from Teton County who can join in person, like Mr. Padilla, and people who can join virtually, like Mr. Chafee. I really appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Yin. Further questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Chafee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good work.
All right, folks. And with that, you would not believe the number of hands that continue to be raised in the virtual world. I know there are hands that would like to be raised here as well. However, we now approach 4 hours on the topic, and as much as I want to keep it going, unfortunately, I don't believe that I have the time to do that. Although, if either or both of the bills progress, of course, the conversation continues, and you can share any information that you have, written or otherwise, to any of the members of the committee. You can email us your information. You can pull us aside, whatever you'd like to get your testimony in. And I'm very thankful as the chairman of Judiciary Committee to have so much interest in the topic. So that's always exciting, but I will close public testimony at this time. Thank you. Committee, you have two bills in front of you. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move House Bill 209.
Representative Yin moves House Bill 209. Representative Provenza second. Discussion on the bill. Representative Craigo.
So we've heard lots and lots of testimony. And as I sit here today, I'm against legalizing marijuana. I'm not in favor of that. And one of the arguments for legalization is we want to be a leader in Wyoming, want to continue to be a leader, and that we want to, stay ahead of everybody else. And to be honest, we're already behind everybody else. And, I would submit, as I said here today, that being a leader means we resist the urge to be like everybody else. But I have received hundreds of emails from my little old district, people in favor, people against, and I can't tell you which sides submitted more emails to me, more comments, more phone calls. Personally, I'm against it. But I will be an I vote on moving the bill because I think we need to have that discussion on the floor. We need to let the entire body have that discussion. And so I'll vote to move it forward, but I will most likely be a no on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Craigo. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will be a no vote for several thousand reasons, which I won't explain right now, but for the sake of preserving the family unit, the Wyoming family units, and for the sake of the sanity of law enforcement, I will leave it at that. I'm a no vote.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Vice Chairman, Representative Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, this is a complex issue with a lot of moving parts. And I think that there are very sincere people who are using this product for all the right reasons to do the best for themselves in a complex medical world. But we're also in an environment where we're dealing with federal law, and it has taken a stand that this product is illegal under federal law. I think that we create all sorts of challenges for ourselves when a state makes something legal that is illegal at the federal level. If we were going to exempt ourselves from parts of federal regulations, I probably start with something other than the Controlled Substances Act, maybe the Endangered Species Act. But that being said, I think that I would be a no vote both today and on the floor on this bill. I know people use this product as medicine, but it's not a medicine under federal law. It's not identified as a medicine. It can't be marketed as a medicine. It can't be prescribed as a medicine. Yet we hear testimony every day from all sorts of people who use it as a medicine. And I just think it's a very complicated thing for a Judiciary Committee in Cheyenne, Wyoming to preempt the Food and Drug Administration and decide that we're going to call this product a medicine despite what they have to say. And the dosage problem is an obstacle for me. So I'll be a no vote today, but it's not because I'm not sympathetic to the folks out there that we've heard, and I understand your quandary.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Washit. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a great discussion. Really appreciate everybody in this committee. And I can't tell you how torn I am on it because of just such strong interest in both sides. I'm very interested in the freedom aspect of it. You know, I mean, how much difference is there between alcohol and tobacco and different things? And some really good statements that we've had on the interest in the legal regulation of it being beneficial. There's also the balance on the other side of the problems with it, the costs. I talked about it earlier. I do believe we've underestimated, or you know, what's in front of us underestimates the cost, the regulatory, the enforcement around production of it, around the laws, around the use and the misuse of it, around increased DUIs and the detection of that, and law enforcement, increased substance abuse, increased healthcare costs, mental health care costs. These could all be something that the state incurs as a cost. And I think we've probably overstated the revenue. I will say this one thing I'm interested in, there's a provision for local control or local prohibition. I think that's something that might make this, you know, where communities can decide for themselves. So maybe we've heard maybe Teton County's interested in this, and maybe other communities don't want it. So I think maybe that's a provision that makes it so I could get behind it more. In fact, I'm thinking possibly of an amendment to do it the other way around, that a community would have to choose and vote and opt in if we were to go with it. And I can also tell you, I never imagined that I'd end up flipping. You know, I've thought medical marijuana is something that is a good idea and that should be, you know, because you hear so much about it. And then Ms. Bush tells us, and I don't know why I didn't have it figured out, but I mean, we can't legally prescribe it. So the conundrum that it puts the medical field in. So it's hard to think that we would legalize it, but it's not even something we can prescribe. So there's just a lot. I'm not sure we're quite ready for it, but I guess at this point, I'll join Representative Craigo and say maybe the community is interested enough in this to move it forward, and let the constituents talk to their representatives, and let us take this to the floor.
Thank you, Representative Oakley. Further discussion, Representative Yin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I'll be brief. There are pros and cons, no doubt about it. There's some cons, but for me, I think the pros far outweigh the cons. When you know, and I think the biggest one is one that Representative Provenza pointed out this morning, which is the benefit of just getting so many low-level marijuana offenses off people's records, and just not even having the risk of having them be arrested for doing something in essentially their own home that, you know, why should I care about what they do in their own home? And to mirror what Representative Olson, Mr. Chairman, said at the very beginning of this presentation, is the fact that, you know, you don't have to be in favor of smoking marijuana. I've never smoked marijuana in my life, never taken edibles. I've never done anything of that nature, but that doesn't mean I want to stop someone else from doing it. So, of course, I'm a co-sponsor. I'll be voting in favor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Provenza, and then Representative Lart. No, okay. Just making sure everyone gets a shot here. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief too. So obviously my name's on this bill as well. I watched my mom and my uncle both struggle with the same stage 4 level of cancer. My mom decided that she was going to use marijuana to help her through her treatment, which happened days after she was diagnosed, mind you, not long enough to go get a medical card. And my uncle didn't decide to use marijuana. My mom is now celebrating 5 years cancer-free. My uncle has died. He couldn't maintain his weight. He couldn't stay well. So he's no longer with us. And so many people are making these decisions. And any bar from allowing them to be able to make that personal choice of freedom and liberty is another bar from keeping people from being able to get the help that they need. So I'm on and for this bill, and I hope we can have this discussion on the floor. Thank you very much, committee.
Well, thank you, committee. Assuming no other comments, obviously, my position on the bill, I'll obviously be voting for liberty today, and I'll be voting for access to medicine. So I think you know my vote. Okay, please call the roll on House Bill 209.
Representative Craigo,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
No.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Williams,
No.
Vice Chairman Washit,
No.
Representative Yin,
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer voted aye, and Chairman Olson.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes, 3 noes. The noes being Representative Larson, Representative Williams, and Vice Chairman Washit.
Committee, in your final time, do we have a motion on House Bill 82? We have a motion on House Bill 82. Okay, no motion on House Bill 82. Any further comments, committee? Thank you, committee.
He didn't say, so you'll ask probably. Yeah. He didn't